In March, Italy was the first Western country to temporarily ban ChatGPT over unlawful data collection. Since then, the government said it has allocated €30 million to help unemployed people and workers in positions at risk of automation to boost their digital skills. Many parents believe their teens are too attached to their phones, maybe even addicted. Recently, some major tech companies, including Google and Apple, have said they would introduce features to help parents and kids monitor and manage their time online.
The study, which included 743 U.S. teens and 1,058 U.S. parents of teens, was conducted. In keeping with other findings, girls were more likely than boys to say they spend too much time on social media, while boys were 4 times as likely to report spending too much time on video games. The top emotion teens associated with not having access to their phones was anxiety, with girls once again reporting more anxiety from phone deprivation. Meanwhile, parents are concerned about their kids' smartphone use and many are enforcing limits.
Perhaps most interesting was Pew's findings on how kids feel about their parents' use of technology. While parents say their teen is sometimes or often distracted by their phone while having real-life conversations, more than half of teens say the same about their parents. This raises the issue, highlighted by others including MIT professor Sherry Tickle, that parents would be smart to consider the technological behavior they model to their children. Simply feed mountains of text from the internet to a giant mathematical model called a neural network.
But the approach has its drawbacks. For one thing, the training procedure required to transmute vast text archives into state-of-the-art language models is costly and time-intensive. For another, even the people who train large language models find it hard to understand their inner workings. That, in turn, makes it hard to predict the many ways they can fail. Now, in a paper recently posted to the scientific preprint server arcs4.org, a pair of Microsoft researchers have introduced a new method for training tiny language models, raise them on a strict diet of children's stories.
Machine learning researchers have embraced this lesson. GPT 3.5, the large language model that powers the ChatGPT interface, has nearly 200 billion parameters, and it was trained on a data set comprising hundreds of billions of words. OpenAI hasn't released the corresponding figures for its successor, GPT-4. Training such large models typically requires at least 1,000 specialized processors, called GPUs, running in parallel for weeks at a time. Only a few companies can muster the requisite resources, let alone train and compare different models.
The two researchers showed that language models thousands of times smaller than today's state-of-the-art systems rapidly learn to tell consistent and grammatical stories when trained in this way. Their results hint at new research directions that might be helpful for training larger models and understanding their behavior. The neural networks at the heart of language models are mathematical structures loosely inspired by the human brain. Each one contains many artificial neurons arranged in layers, with connections between neurons in adjacent layers.
A model only truly comes to life during training, when it repeatedly compares its own output to the text in its training data set and adjusts its parameters to increase the resemblance. An untrained network with random parameters is trivially easy to assemble from a few lines of code, but it will just produce gibberish. After training, it can often plausibly continue unfamiliar text. Larger models often undergo further fine-tuning that teaches them to answer questions and follow instructions, but the bulk of the training is mastering word prediction.
To generate coherent children's stories, a language model would need to learn facts about the world, keep track of characters and events, and observe the rules of grammar. Simpler versions of the challenges facing large models. But large models trained on massive data sets learn countless irrelevant details along with the rules that really matter. Eldon hoped the brevity and limited vocabulary of children's stories might make learning more manageable for small models, making them both easier to train and easier to understand.
A mathematician who joined Microsoft Research in 2022 to study generative language models, wanted to develop a cheaper and faster way to explore their abilities. The natural way to do that was by using a small data set, and that in turn meant he'd have to train models to specialize in a specific task, so they wouldn't spread themselves too thin. Initially, he wanted to train models to solve a certain class of math problems, but one afternoon, after spending time with his 5-year-old daughter, he realized that children's stories were a perfect fit.
Success at word prediction requires a language model to master many different skills. For example, the rules of English grammar suggest that the next word after the word going is likely regardless of the subject of the text. In addition, a system needs factual knowledge to complete the capital of France, and completing a passage containing the word OT requires a rudimentary grasp of logic. Raw language is very complicated. In order for interesting linguistic capabilities to arise, people have resorted to more data is better.